Elon Musk shocked the world again. In a statement, he called USAID a criminal organization, hinting at covert operations, influence on political processes, and questionable funding. Musk knows more than he says.
Your money is being wasted, and the Department of Government Efficiency is going to fix that.
USAID has long been accused of covertly meddling in the affairs of other countries. There have been leaks about funding protests, developing secret platforms like Zoom to influence public opinion. When Elon Musk called USAID a criminal organization, many took his words as another high-profile provocation. A few weeks later, however, the FBI made an unexpected announcement. A major investigation found evidence of corruption, financial fraud, and misuse of funds within the agency.
How much do you think we can rip out?
I think we can do at least $2 trillion.
According to sources, shortly after Musk's statements, law enforcement agencies received an anonymous leak, encrypted documents indicating years of financial irregularities at USAID. The FBI decided to look into the information, and the results were staggering. Funds earmarked for humanitarian aid were being siphoned off to private contractors and offshore accounts. USAID was funding clandestine political campaigns and information operations in other countries. The agency's budget was used for unofficial intelligence projects. The most shocking finding was correspondence between USAID officials discussing ways to circumvent audits and launder millions of dollars through fictitious humanitarian funds. One of the letters, signed by a senior agency official, bluntly stated,
And so we're going to be watching them, and Elon and the group are going to be watching them. And if they can cut, it's better. And if they don't cut, then Elon will do the cutting.
The issue of audits is solvable. The main thing is to keep sources under wraps and keep Musk under control. Elon Musk, upon learning of the outcome of the investigation, limited himself to a short tweet, "I warned you." Meanwhile, sources say that the FBI is preparing the first arrests, but there are fears that the case may try to hush it up at the highest level.
USAID, run by radical lunatics, and we're getting them out.
The question remains, will the world get the real truth, or will the high-profile investigation simply fade away behind the scenes of power?
I'm the acting director of USAID. I've delegated that authority to someone, but I stay in touch with him.
USAID has for decades been positioned as a tool to help countries in crisis, as well as an agent of democratic and economic reform. However, the agency's actual effectiveness is often questioned. Historically, USAID has repeatedly been the target of accusations of corruption, misspending, and political bias. One of the most glaring examples of the agency's failure is the situation in Haiti after the devastating 2010 earthquake. However, this is far from the only case. On January 12, 2010, Haiti experienced one of the worst natural disasters in its history, a magnitude 7.0 earthquake. As a result, some 300,000 people died and hundreds of thousands were left homeless. The US, along with international organizations, sent more than $4.4 billion to help Haiti, of which $1.5 billion was allocated directly to USAID for emergency aid and another $3 billion to rebuild the country. Years later, however, it became clear that much of this money had not reached those in need, and the massive infrastructure projects promised by USAID had not materialized. For example, of the $2.13 billion in contracts and grants to help Haiti, less than $50 million, just 2%, went to local Haitian organizations. By contrast, $1.3 billion settled in the accounts of US contractors, mostly based in Washington. This has created a wave of discontent among Haitians and independent experts alike. Most of the allocated funds were not used to rebuild the country's infrastructure, but rather for consulting fees and administrative costs for American companies.
And USAID is a bowl of worms.
Mm-hmm.
There is no apple. And when there is no apple, you've just got to basically get rid of the whole thing.
He argues that it's funding radical left causes that are anti-American, and that Trump is on board with the changes.
I went over it with him in detail, and he agreed with that we should shut it down.
As a result, even basic aid was lacking on the ground. Millions of Haitians continued to live in tents without access to clean water and food. One of the most high-profile scandals involved the Red Cross, which was also involved in the distribution of aid and claimed to have sheltered 130,000 people. However, An investigation revealed that the organization had actually built only 6 houses. In addition to inefficiencies, USAID has faced allegations of corruption. Some of the agency's contractors overcharged for projects or failed to deliver promised work at all. For example, a housing program in the northern part of the country, which USAID supervised, cost $90 million, but only 900 houses were built instead of the promised 15,000. And these houses were of such poor quality that they were in need of repair several months after occupancy. The $55 million contract awarded by USAID to Chimonics International also raised questions. Under the terms of the contract, the company was supposed to coordinate the distribution of humanitarian aid and organize economic recovery projects. However, Chimonics ended up allocating only 10% of the funds directly to projects in Haiti, while the rest of the budget went to administrative costs, including high salaries for managers and consultants.
It is an entity that spends taxpayer dollars, and it needs to spend it, as the statute says, in alignment with the policy directives that they get from the Secretary of State, the National Security Council, and the President.
In the end, the situation in Haiti became one of the clearest examples of USAID's ineffectiveness, demonstrating that the allocation of billions of dollars does not guarantee improved living conditions in the affected regions. Moreover, despite numerous investigations and criticism, there has been no accountability for where the money went. The case of Haiti is by no means the only example of questionable distribution of USAID funds. In Afghanistan, the agency has been funding economic and infrastructure reconstruction projects for years, but much of that money ended up in the pockets of local officials and US contractors. One of the most high-profile scandals broke in 2014 when an Afghan employee of a USAID contractor was arrested for embezzling more than $500,000 from an agricultural development fund. The money was supposed to be used to support farmers, agricultural development, and food security. However, it was transferred to fictitious company accounts, after which traces of the funds disappeared. The case of the Afghan contractor revealed an even more serious problem: the lack of proper control over the spending of USAID funds. The agency allocated billions of dollars for various programs in Afghanistan, but there were virtually no mechanisms to control how they were used. As a result, local officials and businessmen had access to huge financial flows, while the projects themselves were either partially implemented or not implemented at all. One of the biggest failures was the construction of an electric power plant in Kabul, for which more than $300 million were allocated. However, the facility was never completed, and the money was spent on dubious subcontracting schemes involving both Afghan and American companies. As a result, local residents were left without the promised electricity, and USAID was unable to explain where the funds went. Another example is a program to build schools and hospitals in rural areas of Afghanistan. About $500 million was allocated for this project, but it turned out that much of the money was spent on bribing local authorities and fictitious contracts. As a result, many schools existed only on paper, and hospitals were either not built or operated intermittently due to lack of equipment and personnel. In addition to humanitarian projects, USAID actively funds non-governmental organizations, NGOs, around the world. However, these programs also raise serious questions. The agency has been repeatedly accused of using its grants not to support civil society, but to interfere in the internal affairs of other states. For example, in 2014, it became known that USAID funded media projects in Ukraine aimed at promoting pro-Western ideas. Later, it turned out that about 90% of Ukrainian media outlets broadcasting pro-government views received funding from USAID. This calls into question the objectivity of the information space in the region. Another high-profile case is related to the agency's activities in Venezuela. In 2019, it was revealed that USAID was funneling millions of dollars to support the opposition, including through funding media resources and political groups. This prompted accusations of attempted interference in the affairs of a sovereign state. For decades, USAID has acted not only as a humanitarian aid organization, but also as an instrument of political influence. Its work spans many countries, but its outward charity hides much darker modus operandi. While USAID officially supports democracy and infrastructure development, in reality it controls the economy, media, and even the political elite of entire states. In some cases, it involves interfering in electoral processes, financing radical movements, and even using biological and economic methods of destabilization. USAID's history is filled with shocking facts that rarely receive media coverage. Many projects funded by the agency have in fact turned out to be operations to control countries, their economies and political systems. But the most disturbing cases involve covert programs about which the public knows almost nothing. One of the most high-profile leaks related to USAID was the revelation of a secret program called Operation Griffin. According to documents that became publicly available after USAID's servers were hacked in 2022, the agency used fake medical foundations to collect information on key politicians in recipient countries. Officially, these foundations offered free medical services to officials and their families, but in reality, doctors collected sensitive data, including DNA test results, medical records, and even psychological profiles. Insiders claim that the data collected was used to pressure state leaders. For example, one document reveals that the president of an African country refused to sign a military cooperation agreement with the US, after which his family was offered a unique medical examination from the USAID Foundation. 2 months after the refusal, his youngest daughter died suddenly under unclear circumstances, and he himself promptly signed the agreement, which he had previously blocked. Moreover, Operation Griffin involved working with private intelligence companies hired by USAID to spy on journalists, activists, and opposition politicians. The compromising data collected on them was later used to neutralize their activities by intimidating or blackmailing them with revelations. One of the most frightening revelations was an investigation related to a USAID program codenamed Dark Water. According to the leaked data, the agency has for decades used humanitarian missions as a cover to test new methods of biological effects on populations in impoverished regions. One of the first known cases was the USAID-sponsored mass vaccine testing in Brazil in 2017. Officially, the campaign was aimed at combating viral diseases, but a few months into the campaign, the region experienced an outbreak of an unknown virus that medics could not identify. Symptoms included severe cognitive decline, weakened immunity, and unexplained neurological disorders. More than 60% of those infected died within 6 months. Documents obtained by independent journalists indicate that vaccination under the USAID program was accompanied by the collection of biological samples and observation of the subjects. This gives reason to suspect that in reality it was not about protecting the population, but about experiments with unknown bioagents. In addition, under Dark Water, USAID actively cooperated with private pharmaceutical corporations that tested new drugs on people in developing countries through the agency. One of the exposed contracts with a major biotechnology company involved field trials of an experimental immunomodulator that were conducted among African refugees. The results of the trials have not been published anywhere, but numerous testimonies point to an outbreak of rare autoimmune diseases in the regions where the testing took place. USAID not only interferes in politics but also actively controls the economies of the recipient countries. On the surface, everything looks noble. The agency provides loans and investments for the development of infrastructure, agriculture, and industry. However, this money is never given without conditions. USAID agreements always contain clauses that force countries to change their economic policies in favor of the United States. For example, a commitment to eliminate protective tariffs and open markets to US corporations, privatization of state-owned enterprises in favor of Western investors, eliminating subsidies for local production, making countries dependent on imports. In 2021, journalists discovered that USAID was funding dozens of TV companies and websites through front funds, creating the desired public opinion in countries where there was a struggle for control. One of the exposed operations was related to the falsification of sociological data, when the agency bribed think tanks to publish poll results favorable to the United States. One such case occurred in Eastern Europe, where USAID promoted through the media the view that 80% of the population supported certain economic reforms. It later turned out that the real level of support was less than 30%, but the falsified figures helped the US sell its demands. USAID is not just a development agency. It is a complex and multi-layered structure that operates on the edge of legality, using economic, media, and even biological methods of influence. It is engaged not only in financing democratic reforms, but also in covert operations aimed at controlling the politics and economies of entire countries. Each year reveals new evidence that USAID is not just a humanitarian organization, but an instrument of global influence, using the most radical methods to achieve its goals. When Donald Trump returned to the White House in 2025, one of his first decisions was to investigate USAID. The official version was to fight corruption and inefficient budget spending, but it soon became clear that the reasons were much deeper. Secret reports submitted to the White House by independent analysts claimed that USAID functioned as a state within a state, creating shadowy networks of influence around the world. The agency not only interfered in other countries' elections and economies, but also allegedly funded projects that were directly contrary to the interests of the United States itself. Trump did not stop at arrests. He launched Operation Nemesis, during which the U.S. intelligence agencies began to identify USAID agents of influence within the American political system. It turned out that many former officials of the agency continued to work for the UN, the World Bank, and even the U.S. Treasury Department. One of the most high-profile revelations was the case of a former USAID administrator who, as it turned out, had ties to international business cartels and lobbied their interests through the agency's programs. But the most frightening revelation was the so-called information capsules, encrypted servers on which USAID stored data on its secret operations. After the agency was dismantled, they were discovered in underground vaults at the premises of private companies linked to high-ranking officials of past administrations. These servers contained detailed schemes for manipulating world markets, secret contracts with major corporations, and plans to destabilize key regions. Most egregiously, the documents contained lists of journalists the agency considered a threat and the methods by which they were discredited or eliminated. The reaction to Trump's actions was immediate. Many media outlets previously funded by the agency launched a massive campaign against the president, accusing him of authoritarianism and attempts to destroy the only system of international aid. But despite resistance from elites, USAID officially ceased to exist in April 2025. Many former agency officials fled abroad for fear of prosecution. It turned out that USAID was far more than just a development agency. It was a structure that for decades manipulated politics, economics, and the media, promoting the hidden interests of elites. Since its dissolution, the world has begun to change. Many countries that had previously depended on the agency suddenly faced political instability, which only confirmed USAID's influence on the world order. But was this the end? Or were the elites already preparing a new entity to replace the dismantled agency? The answer to this question was yet to be found. After the liquidation of USAID, a real legal war began. Although the Trump administration officially announced the closure of the agency, its former leaders, as well as numerous international organizations, made accusations that the decision was illegal. Protracted proceedings began in U.S. and international courts that threatened to reveal even more shocking details. When the U.S. government requested access to the foundation's accounts, Swiss authorities suddenly refused to hand over the data, citing banking secrecy. This raised suspicions that USAID had built up a veritable financial empire over the years that could not be destroyed by a simple presidential decree. This organization has been much more cautious. Funding went through cryptocurrency networks, excluding bank control. All projects were formalized through private consulting firms that had no official ties to the United States. The leadership consisted not of officials, but of former top managers of transnational corporations and private intelligence agencies. GRI's main goal was not just to replace USAID, but to create an entirely new approach to global governance in which money, power, and control no longer depended on individual countries. However, the most shocking was the investigation that revealed the existence of the Phantom Program, developed in the last years of USAID's existence. Its essence was to create a new class of humanitarian organizations that did not exist physically, but operated in the digital space. Tens of thousands of fake NGOs were created, each with an official website, registered documents, and even directors, artificially created personalities with fake biographies. These NGOs supposedly carried out humanitarian activities, receiving hundreds of millions of dollars in donations and grants. The money was deposited into anonymous accounts and then disappeared in a complex system of transfers through offshore, cryptocurrency wallets and private trust funds. But worst of all, The leaked documents revealed that some of these humanitarian organizations were used to illegally test technologies for mass social control. In several African countries, cases were documented in which people receiving free medical care were put into a state of temporary paralysis to test behavioral responses to external stimuli. Even more frightening was the discovery of documents related to the digital humanitarian surveillance project that USAID was developing before the liquidation. The main elements of the program: the introduction of unique digital identifiers for all aid recipients, the use of hidden biometric chips to track people's movements, development of smart cities in which a social rating system determined the level of citizens' access to resources. These technologies were tested in several countries, including South America and Southeast Asia. However, after USAID closed down, data on these experiments disappeared, and no one could say who was now in control of these developments. When journalists began looking for who exactly sponsored GRI, it turned out that its beneficiaries were the same financial structures that had been cooperating with USAID for decades. Among them were funds associated with the world's largest banks, transnational corporations, and even closed elite clubs, which had previously been only rumored. Most unexpectedly, several major social media platforms suddenly began promoting GRI's agenda, encouraging users to donate to a new phase of humanitarian development. This led to suspicions that USAID was now being replaced by a global covert governance system that completely avoided public scrutiny. When the hunt for the remaining USAID officials began, some of them disappeared to unknown destinations. Some are rumored to have settled in countries that do not have extradition agreements with the United States. But one of the agency's most powerful former employees came to the attention of international investigators when he was discovered at a private meeting in Dubai to discuss future financial controls on international aid. Rather than disappearing, USAID's influence structures have simply mutated, becoming even more covert and difficult to monitor. It is no longer a government agency, but a network of private foundations, digital platforms, and financial mechanisms that operate outside traditional government systems. Eliminating USAID was only the first step, but while the world once knew where to look for signs of manipulation, the new system now operates in the shadows, taking advantage of digital and financial technologies that do not report to any government. And the main question remains: what is the future of global humanitarian aid if it is backed by people who have used it for decades for control, manipulation, and covert operations? There is no answer yet. But one thing is certain: this story is not over.